That's the end, isn't it? Such comments of these will be familiar. I have not heard from him in a month. He has moved on, hasn't he? I exposed what she is like to all of her family. She won't be contacting me again, that's for sure. I told him I know what he is, and he disappeared, so I doubt I will hear from him again. He is with somebody else already, so I guess he won't want me again, will he? I told him what I thought of him, and he just backed off. He won't hoover me, will he? He came crying back to me, and I gave him short shrift. I doubt he will bother again. Wrong. There are many different scenarios and outcomes involving our kind, where the victim considers that our kind will not bother with them again, post-discard or post-escape. The victim thinks that a period of total silence, the involvement of the narcissist with a new victim, the manner in which the relationship ended, will all mean that the narcissist will not come sniffing around the victim ever again. We will. Why is this the case? Firstly, you must understand our perspective. You belong to us. You are our appliance. You are our property. The formal relationship between us may have ended, but the narcissistic relationship is forever. It only ends when either you or I cease to draw breath. It does not matter that we enter into a new formal relationship with somebody else. It does not matter if you do. It does not matter that World War III erupted when we parted company. It does not matter if there has been complete silence for 2 years. None of these factors alter the fact that in our minds, the connection between you and I, because of the narcissistic relationship, lasts until one of us dies. Secondly, the attraction of gathering fuel from you is substantial, and this is the prime driver for never letting go. Fuel is so important to us that it drives everything about our behavior, and the link between you and I is no exception to the all-pervasive power of fuel. Thirdly, factors such as new partners, the affliction of time, and the manner in which the former relationship has ended are largely immaterial. I am repeatedly asked by people whether a hoover will happen. I always answer the same. The risk always remains, but you can manage that risk. People set out the circumstances at the end of the formal relationship to me, what has happened since, if anything, and ask whether a hoover will happen. Or they express their view that they do not think it will happen because of A or B or C. My answer again is the same. The risk of us returning always remains, but you can manage the risk. It is never the end. There is always a risk, a chance, a probability, or a possibility that we will return to you and apply a hoover. You cannot assume that it is over. No matter how much it may seem that it is over, no matter how much it may appear to you that we will not come back, that we apparently have no reason to do so, such assumptions are dangerous. There are only 2 factors which are material to the issue of whether you will be hoovered again. The first factor is the hoover trigger. For a hoover to happen, potentially it must be triggered. This means that you must come into our sights, that we sniff the prospective fuel that leaks from you, that something happens to cause you to come upon our radar. Whether this happens depends on whether you enter one of the 6 spheres of influence. I have spoken separately about them in the video, The Spheres of Influence. I will not repeat its content here, other than to state that 1. You have control over whether you enter any of the first 5 spheres of influence, and 2. You have no control whatsoever over whether you enter into the 6th sphere of influence. By staying away from us through no contact, you will not enter the first 5 spheres. The 6th sphere is when we happen to think of you. Thus, if you have successfully implemented no contact, the only risk of a trigger being activated is if we happen to think of you. You cannot influence that. Our preoccupation with your replacement means we are far less likely to think of you, and hoovers are triggered by you doing something to enter the first 5 spheres, such as messaging us, or passing by where we live or work. If you maintain no contact, the first 5 spheres will not be entered. It then just depends on whether we happen to think of you. This may not happen for weeks or months. You can therefore see that by staying out of the first 5 spheres, you will vastly reduce the risk of a Hoover trigger being activated. But you cannot state that it will never happen, as it is reliant on if we happen to think of you. That may just be a random occurrence, or it might be because we see something that reminds us of you. The second factor is only applicable if the Hoover trigger has been activated. The second factor concerns the Hoover execution criteria. These criteria include such matters as whether you are understood to be a potent source of fuel, whether you can easily be located, whether you can easily be contacted, whether you have your defenses maintained concerning us, whether you remain mired in the emotional sea, what support networks you have in place, how well fueled we are, the nature of the narcissist who entangled with you, lesser, mid-range, or greater, and potential obstacles. All of these matters combine to determine whether it is worthwhile us expending our energy to act on the Hoover trigger. Certain factors lift the Hoover bar too high, so it reduces considerably the risk of the criteria being met, and therefore a Hoover will not happen. If we are presented with a sitting target who we know flows with fuel, who remains caught in the emotional sea, isolated and exposed, then the Hoover execution criteria bar is very low, and a Hoover will invariably occur. If, on the other hand, it is very hard to contact you, we know that you stopped flowing with fuel when dealing with us. Indeed, you wounded us last time we tried to contact you, and you have a new partner who will act as a gate guardian to stop us trying to reach you and so forth, then you are more likely to become a flawed reason to extract emotion, otherwise known as a free. For a worked example of how this can happen if someone enters the first sphere of influence, I recommend you read the blog article Hoover Time, Sphere 1. Accordingly, if you can do everything possible to become a free, then even if a Hoover trigger is activated, then the chances of us executing that Hoover will be considerably reduced. By contrast, if you fail to attain becoming a free, then you run the risk of a Hoover being executed. You will note in the Hoover execution criteria above that there is no mention of the gap between when we last contacted you and the current time. There is no mention of the circumstances in which you parted company as the formal relationship. There is no mention of you knowing what we are, whether you told us, whether you exposed our abuses to others. These are not factors which will necessarily concern us. What matters more is whether you wounded us. That becomes a potential obstacle. The existence of a new partner is not relevant in isolation, but is only a partial consideration when looked at with the other factors. In some instances, for example, the lesser or the mid-range narcissist may well be put off by the existence of a new partner because there is a greater risk of rejection, and that perceived rejection amounts to wounding. A greater, however, will not regard the existence of a new partner to present any concern whatsoever. Indeed, the greater will see it as an opportunity to triangulate and gain fuel from both you and your new partner. The issue of a new partner for a lesser or mid-ranger raises the Hoover bar. However, if, for example, they know that the fuel that flows from you is particularly potent and they can easily approach you, then those factors will outweigh the existence of a new partner. Accordingly, the factors that I have mentioned need to be looked at in aggregate. Accordingly, when you are asking yourself, is that it? Is it the end? Is it over? Or whether a hoover may happen, remember this. 1. With regards to a hoover, you can never say never. 2. There needs to be a hoover trigger. You can significantly influence whether there is one and reduce the risk, but you cannot remove it altogether. 3. The hoover execution criteria need to be met. Again, you can significantly influence whether the criteria are met, and thus you raise the hoover bar as high as you possibly can by becoming a free, and therefore you reduce the risk, but you cannot remove it. The issue of whether you will experience a hoover is not completely in your hands, but it is far more within your control than you might at first have thought. It is never the end, but you are not helpless.